Hello, my name is Daphne Arnold, and I am part of the Commedia dell'arte group. I'm sure I butchered that, but I'm not Italian, so please bear with me. I am part of the Commedia dell'arte group, and I will be discussing the history and tradition portion of Commedia dell'arte. So, diving in to the history, we can see the emergence of Commedia dell'arte in Italy during the 1500s. The name Commedia dell'arte translates to comedy of the professional artist, which is precisely what it was during this time. It was a way for professional artists and actors to find work. This type of theater was one of the first that was performed by trained actors, and these trained actors traveled in troops together. So the troops would travel um, from town to town, and they would perform in public spaces like town squares using simple portable stages. A lot of the times it was the wagons they were traveling in. They would kind of dismantle, open up, and use that as the stage, and sometimes it was something they pulled along with them. These shows were often comedies that were full of energy, movement, and physical comedy. On my first slide, I put a picture kind of portraying Commedia dell'arte, a troupe performing in the town square in the local center. Next, why it all began. Commedia dell'arte was started as a way to not only provide a way to work for professional artists and actors, but it was also started as a way to entertain all types of people, from the rich and the royal to the lowest commoner. At the time, most of the formal theaters they had shows that were meant to be performed for the elite, the wealthy, but the Commedia dell'arte was designed with everyone in mind. It was a type of theater that used improv and a simple story to give a basic outline of the performance while keeping it fresh and also keeping it exciting for the audience throughout each performance. On this slide, I put a picture of just a simple little scene between two characters that show its comedy and its satire and how it poked fun at things like authority figures, love, social class, money, and stuff like that. Traditions within Commedia dell'arte. Commedia dell'arte had strong traditions that most actors followed. Most of the characters within the plays were some of the very same and familiar ones from each show. These roles used characters that were called stock characters, and they included characters like, apologies, I know I can't say this correctly, Arl- Arlecchino, who was used for the clever servant, or Pantalone as the greedy old man. These roles were called the stock characters because they formed the very stock of the plays that were present in each story. They were also very recognizable to the audience, regardless of where they were, or if it was the first time someone was seeing a play, or if it was maybe the 100th time someone was seeing a play. The characters involved in the Commedia dell'arte, when they performed, they wore masks and they wore outlandish costumes. The actors used exaggerated movements throughout the performance and comedy routines that were called lazzi. They incorporated this using improvised comedic dialect and verbal or physical gag acts that were sometimes added to the plot or helped to relate the story to the current action of the play. These traditions were passed down and upheld by the families of the traveling troops that performed them. On this slide, I just showed some of the costumes that were used when performing, And I also showed some of these stock characters that you would see in some of the familiar plays. Oops, sorry. Cultural influences. Looking at the history, we can see that Commedia dell'arte was heavily influenced by the ancient Roman comedies and also from the Italian folk stories from the region in which it began. They also incorporated a lot of local dialect, local Italian dialect, and then when they traveled further throughout Europe, they would incorporate other dialects as well. And the performances reflected heavily on everyday life in Italy, which included class struggles, romantic troubles, some of the things that were easier to portray and also relate to the common man. And as the Commedia dell'arte began to spread to other countries like France and Spain, where it later became very popular, it picked up new influences while remaining popular with both the common people and the royals alike. For this slide, I just inputted a picture of ancient Roman theater and how you can kind of see similarities between it and the Commedia dell'arte performers with their masks and their attire, their costumes. Even though Commedia dell'arte was a little more exaggerated, you can kind of see the connection here. Commedia dell'arte over time. Over time, Commedia dell'arte moved from traveling from town to town and performing on their simple wagons and their little stages to traveling and performing in more theater like areas. They had bigger stages, they were less outside, they were more like you would see kind of today inside theaters. It became an even more popular form of theater across Europe and even influenced later writers that we've talked about in class, such as Shakespeare and Moliere. The traveling troupes of the Commedia dell'arte also became known for having some female actors, actresses, however you want to say it, become famous, which was very rare for this time. And as time progressed on and change became inevitable, the Commedia dell'arte shows remained funny and physical, even as the settings around them continued to change. For this slide, I input a picture of a stage that was more permanent. It was less simple. It wasn't so they could pull it behind them if they were traveling. And I also put a picture of a female actress that, again, was rare to see in these times. And the declining lasting impact of Commedia dell'arte in theater. So as time continued to march on, the Commedia dell'arte, it did begin to fade and die out in the late 1700s as the incorporation of more scripted and realistic theater became the more popular option for theater performances. However, the influence of Commedia dell'arte can still be seen in today's modern comedy performances in different ways. Modern day clowning, sketch comedy, improv, sitcom shows, they're all examples of modern types of comedy performances that still use or are closely related to Commedia dell'arte's use of stock characters, their improv, and their physical humor. The tradition of this style of theater also helped to shape how we still perform the comedies now. For this slide, I put a picture of a sitcom. I know it shows a clown, but it is a comedy sitcom. And then I also put a photo of an improv skit up. So you can see how they kind of resemble the Commedia dell'arte with the outfits and their, although you can't see it in the picture, their use of physical humor, improvisation, and gag. And in conclusion, for the history and traditions of Commedia dell'arte, Um, this art style, it changed theater by making it more accessible for everyone and also entertaining for everyone because everyone is different and they needed a way to broaden their performances and make it universal. And they did so. And it also included a mix of tradition, improv, and bold characters that left a lasting impact on the audiences that they performed for and also the history of theater as well. And even though it started over 500 years ago, the influence that Commedia dell'arte had and still has can be seen in today's modern comedies. Commedia dell'arte remains a great example of how theater reflects culture while also bringing all types of people together. This was my Commedia dell'arte presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.